Joe, hi. When did you get back?
Just a few minutes ago. That manager of ours travels with me for 2 days and doesn't even try to land a sale. Well, what are you up to? It sounds like some nifty advice coming out of here.
We're listening to the 36 biggest mistakes salespeople make and how to correct them. As a matter of fact, there's something on this tape that you might particularly be interested in, Joe. It's about those times when your supervisor comes with you on calls.
Sure, I'd like to hear it. And so would Terry. Oh, there she is. Hey, Terry, get in here.
What is it?
We're listening to terrific tapes designed to help you correct those mistakes, large and small, that may be keeping you from achieving your maximum potential as a seller. On this tape, we'll hear about how to prepare for prospects' objections, how to dig out the real reason a prospect says no, and how to turn that no into a yes, when to ask to sell a broader line of products, and when not to, and lots more.
I'm all ears. Let her rip.
You got it.
You're listening to the 36 biggest mistakes salespeople make and how to correct them. Let's look at the 18th mistake salespeople make, not handling the product with care.
I don't get it. My salespeople go on just as many calls as our competition. We're even doing as much advertising and promotion as our competitors. Yet, we can't seem to catch up.
What this sales manager doesn't realize is that her people are committing the mistake of not handling the product with care. One of the biggest mistakes in selling is the smug assurance that the mere showing of the product and the explaining of its features are enough. But salespeople who handle their products in a casual, offhand way are inviting an indifferent reception from prospects. Hold the item with tender care, and the buyer's interest will be piqued. Look at it this way. If the product could sell itself without a salesperson's presence, why not simply send a sample to the prospect and let it go at that? The personal touch is as necessary to selling as water is to plants.
Well, I see. You mean my salespeople should handle our product like a priceless diamond.
Exactly. The salesperson's voice, attitude, and gestures should convey absolute respect and admiration for the product. Ask your salespeople to study the way items are presented to them in their daily lives. Food, clothing, automobiles, in stores and in television commercials. They'll see the effectiveness of presenting a product with loving care. It gives the item an air of quality.
In other words, if my people don't show high regard for our product, then the prospect won't give it value either, right?
Yes, and there's more. Your people should also create an atmosphere of quality, confidence, and well-being by the clothes they wear and the cases they carry. The prospect will transfer this impression of quality to your product. The salesperson must also remember that each prospect is like a new audience who has the right to a fresh performance. If the salesperson is dull, apathetic, and disinterested, the prospect will find a way to end the interview.
And a bright, sharp presentation will tune up the prospect like a violin.
You've got it. Many sales are lost because a salesperson left enthusiasm at home. There are two basic parts to making a sale. 1, the product and its features. And 2, the person making the presentation. And the second, the person making the presentation, is equally as important as the first, the product. To sum up, you can correct the mistake of not handling the product with care by
realizing that showing your product and explaining its features is not enough. Always be aware of your presentation skills. Think of your product as a precious commodity.
Remember that each prospect is a new audience who has the right to a bright, sharp sales talk. If you're interested, it's more than likely that the prospect will be.
Getting the customer's attention, arousing interest, creating desire, and the closing of the sale, all these depend on the strength of the presentation. Presentation is how you demonstrate that your product is superior and worth buying, and how you can lead yourself and your company to success.
If a prospect takes over the interview, I'm finished. That's why I keep a list of 10 to 15 answers to any prospect objection I can think of.
Jack, a highly successful plywood salesperson, has conquered the 19th mistake salespeople make, depending on one answer to an objection. Flexibility is the mark of a good salesperson. Salesmanship is a creative, dynamic occupation, calling for imaginative, well-trained personnel. The salesperson who can't shift tactics to meet new situations will always run out of the money. This is particularly true of the salesperson who can't handle objections. A huge mistake is preparing only one answer to an objection or argument thrown by the prospect. If the buyer is dissatisfied with the pat reply, the salesperson can only stammer with embarrassment. Jack uses a system that corrects this mistake of depending on one answer to an objection.
I put together a list of every possible objection I can expect from prospects. Then I write down from 10 to 15 counter-arguments to each objection. To formulate the answers, I make a complete restudy of my product line, get facts from my sales manager, from engineers, production experts, and marketing specialists in my company. Then I memorize the information. But as prepared as I am, I'll still shift direction completely if the prospect's line of questioning requires it.
Jack has learned to be flexible, and being so well prepared, he's found himself actually enjoying fielding prospects' objections. His sales volume has soared, and he feels sure of himself.
I'm not completely perfect. Now and then a prospect stumps me. Then I admit to the prospect that I don't have the answer and promise to check it out immediately. The next day, I'll be in the prospect's office with the facts. I found that this policy really pays off in the confidence prospects place in you.
One thing Jack doesn't do is argue with the prospect. A salesperson loses points by turning an interview into a debate. There are times when the buyer is wrong, and you know it. However, it's bad psychology to throw the mistake into the buyer's face. So much more can be accomplished by diplomacy, being pleasant and understanding. Don't ruin a sale because you insist on being right all the time, especially on small points. Save your big guns for the major objections. To sum up, the mistake of depending on one answer to an objection can be corrected by
thinking of every possible objection from a prospect and then writing down 10 to 15 counter-arguments.
If you really don't have an answer to a prospect's objection or question, don't bluff it. Admit that you don't know. Check out the problem and call the prospect back at the earliest opportunity with the answer, usually no later than the next day.
And no matter what, never argue with a prospect. It won't help you make sales. Use diplomacy.
Knowing how to handle prospects' objections is vital to scoring big in selling.
Who needs a supervisor tagging along? I know what I'm doing. I certainly don't need anyone butting in.
This salesperson is making mistake number 20, ignoring aid from supervisors, a waste of valuable expertise. Many firms assign supervisors to accompany new salespeople around their territories to show them the ropes. Some companies will also delegate a sales manager to travel with a salesperson whose volume has been falling off. But instead of learning from the supervisor, the salesperson in this situation takes a sharply critical attitude, passing judgment on the superior or expecting to be rescued.
The district manager was with me for a week, and what a bust he was. He didn't pick up one order. How does he expect me to come through?
This salesperson missed the whole point of having the district manager along. The supervisor doesn't have to prove anything. He's simply acting as a guide to give the salesperson the benefit of his experience and knowledge of the product, company, and customers. He's definitely not trying to show up the salesperson or do the salesperson's job by getting orders. Some firms make it a practice to have one of its sales supervisors periodically accompany the salespeople in their territories, a form of customer relations that often pays big sales dividends. John, A successful salesperson for a food supplier had a different attitude toward the assistance of a supervisor. He asked his firm to send a sales supervisor or department head to join him on his calls. John was already a good salesperson. He wanted to be a better one.
I made it a point to learn all I could from the supervisor. I learned about weaknesses in my presentation, technique, and product knowledge. Using what I gained, I found myself in 3 years making a much higher income. One of the advantages of having 2 people on a sales call is that it helps you analyze failures immediately after they happen. The supervisor can point out where the salesperson missed an opportunity, overlooked an important factor, or didn't press an advantage. If the error is caught in time, you may be able to return to the prospect the next day and clinch the order.
As an objective observer of the salesperson's performance, the supervisor can tell if he or she was courteous, pleasant, patient, understanding, clear, or tactful. Did the salesperson push too hard when a soft sell was called for? Did he or she somehow rub the prospect the wrong way? Usually the supervisor can spot these mistakes and suggest a remedy.
The only way to really learn from having a supervisor along is to forget your pride and consider your supervisor a friend, not an enemy.
That's the key. Don't think of the accompanying supervisor as some kind of management spy. If you're fearful and suspicious, no rapport will be possible, and you'll lose a good source of useful information. Of course, it's a two-way street. The supervisor should establish an atmosphere of goodwill and understanding with you, too. In conclusion, correct the mistake of ignoring aid from your supervisors by
Not judging your supervisor, but by learning all you can from him or her. Get the benefit of your supervisor's experience.
Putting your pride away for a while. Accept your supervisor's constructive criticism as that of an objective observer who wants you to do well.
Don't make the mistake of ignoring your supervisor's help. Keep an open mind. We can all learn from watching others.
Your price is too high.
We're loyal to our present supplier.
Al, think it over.
My budget's all used up. See me in about 6 months when I have a new budget.
I'll contact you.
Chances are you're familiar with all these excuses from buyers. But do you commit the 21st mistake salespeople make? Accepting dismissal without a fight? Of course, some of these excuses are genuine, but in 90% of the cases, they're not. The buyer is concealing the true reason for not giving you an order. What are the real reasons? Listen.
I don't want to admit I buy a lower price line.
I can't say that I don't have the authority to make a purchase.
I'm not sure what I want to do. I'll stall the salesperson with the first excuse that comes into my head.
I feel I have to say no the first time as a matter of form. It's expected of me.
I want to test the salesperson's reaction to an indifferent or negative reception.
Well, the boss plays golf with the president of a competing company.
How can you tell what really lies behind the prospect statement? Often you can't. But you don't have to let excuses discourage you either. It's a mistake not to put up a fight against this kind of buyer resistance. Stand your ground. If you can weather the prospect's initial reaction, you can usually stay long enough to make a firm presentation. The idea is to keep digging until you found the real reason for the dismissal. Try answering excuses with direct questions like,
Why do you have to think it over?
or,
Why do you think you can't afford our product?
when you get an excuse, knock it down. You'll frequently find there's nothing to the excuses. Be careful, though, not to ridicule even the weakest excuse. Try asking the prospect,
Is there another reason holding you back?
or,
Is there something you haven't told me?
you'll frequently be surprised by a frank and warm response. In the situation when the prospect snaps hostile questions at you, try countering by making sales points close to the buyer's opposition. Listen to this exchange between prospect and seller.
I can't buy from you. Aren't you having labor trouble?
We have one of the most highly skilled labor forces in the country.
Of course, you'll have to be satisfied with some excuses, valid or not. There are times when the prospect won't budge. Perhaps the prospect doesn't have the authority to make a decision, and no company can give its business to every salesperson who calls. This doesn't mean that you should accept every excuse at face value. If you keep hammering away at the dismissal device, sooner or later, you'll hit an excuse that won't stand up under scrutiny. It may take more than one call, perhaps as many as 5 or 6, but the effort will be worth it. Remember that only 20% of the salespeople make 5 or more calls and land 75 to 80% of the business. Many times, you can forearm yourself against an expected excuse. By doing a little checking around the industry, you can come prepared with ammunition. And there's another thing to consider. It makes no sense to high-pressure a buyer whose guard goes up the moment a salesperson approaches. If you push too hard, the prospect is lost for good. The best method is to get the buyer to relax by word, action, or attitude. Let the buyer know that the decision to buy or not to buy is strictly up to him or her. Feed the buyer only facts and information that will help make up his or her mind or change it. If the sale is not made, the effort still has not been wasted. You've built up trust that will pay off for you the next time you call. A tricky statement from a buyer is,
"I'm too busy to talk now."
This could be an excuse, or it may really be sincere. You have to watch yourself here. The wrong response could end your relationship with the prospect. If you believe the excuse or aren't sure, leave your card and depart. If you're convinced that the prospect is simply making an excuse, have something to say immediately. Without seeming to doubt the buyer's word, quickly demonstrate that he or she can't afford not to give you some time. There's no single technique to counter excuses or real objections. Each situation must be handled as you see fit. There are a few basic rules, though, that should be followed.
Don't go away mad.
Don't argue.
Be tactful. Even if the excuse is so thin as to be laughable, handle it diplomatically.
Don't try to steamroller through an excuse. Counter with facts that will capture the prospect's imagination and make her forget about dismissing you.
Help the buyer make up his mind. Give him hard facts that he can take back to his boss.
Many buyers have trained themselves to become experts in the art of dismissal. So you must become an expert in holding fast until the arguments are exhausted. Remember how to correct the mistake of accepting dismissal without a fight.
Prospect resistance is often insincere. The buyer is hiding the real reason. Find out what the real reason is. Then you can deal with it.
Use the technique of countering hostile questions by answering them with sales points not directly related to the query.
Check around the industry. Forearm yourself with answers to prospect excuses.
Hang in there, but don't use high-pressure selling with a buyer whose guard goes up whenever a salesperson appears. Relax the prospect.
Approach objections with tact, patience, and carefully researched facts.
You can't win them all, but you can win enough to afford that vacation in Bermuda. Now for the 22nd mistake salespeople make, running with the pack. Listen to this sales manager.
To register positively on buyers, the salesperson must punch through with some idea or talent that will differentiate him or her from the hundreds of salespeople who call. I suggest to my people that they make themselves recognized by the buyers, set themselves apart in some way. These people are an asset to themselves and to our company. They're not just covering a territory. They're being creative. It takes more than a good product to sell a prospect.
What this sales manager is suggesting is not that his salespeople become loud or vulgar to grab attention or change their basic personalities. What he's saying is that it's to the salesperson's advantage and that of the company to develop a distinctive image. Selling often revolves around the personal relationship between buyer and seller. This rapport is much easier to obtain if the salesperson has made a firm impression on the mind of the customer.
You always know on the second call what kind of impression the salesperson has made on the prospect. If the prospect has forgotten the salesperson's name and can't even remember his or her face, well, the impression was negative.
Many salespeople make the mistake of being afraid to be different. They run with the pack, blend with the herd. They actually seem to seek anonymity by dressing, talking, and acting like every other salesperson. How can this mistake of running with the pack be corrected? Salespeople should express individuality. There should be something about the seller's appearance, manner, or approach that makes him or her stand out in a prospect's mind. Think of the television commercials that have impressed you. They're good, but they're also something else. They're different. Not made in the same mold as the other commercials. Bartles and James launched a highly successful campaign featuring two distinctive characters. Nobody had taken a similar approach before, and it worked. You remember the product, and sales have skyrocketed. A salesperson can correct the mistake of running with the pack by making a major or minor alteration in habit or appearance. Some salespeople have grown a beard, changed their style of dressing, or bought a flashy car. These are only some of the ways by which a salesperson can brighten an impression.
The old adage, alike as two peas in a pod, can be applied to selling. A salesperson who is afraid to bridge convention must be ready to settle for a life of mediocrity.
Let's review how to correct the mistake of running with the pack.
Express your own individuality. There should be something about your appearance, manner, or approach that makes you stand out in a prospect's mind.
Give yourself a distinctive image, but do it with taste and naturalness.
Most of us have the potential for success. It's the way we use that potential that counts. Don't be afraid to be different. All successful people are. Please fast-forward the tape to the end and turn the cassette over. The 36 biggest mistakes salespeople make continues on the other side.